First part of session 102 of the Law of One. Let's take the time here and talk about diet. Yes, food stuff. Let's begin. This session, as with the majority of the last sessions, except next one, 103, is going to be centered around personal material. So we, in essence, have just one more session that covers Law of One material in its sense of education or teaching the Law of One. That is going to be next session. So I've already talked about how the last sessions are spaced out in time. I think this session was done 3 months after session 101, and they're going to continue to be spaced out like that. So I'll just continue to mention it so you can see how they were doing sometimes 2 sessions a day at the beginning. Then they went to a couple of days, then once a week, and now things are starting to be, again, spaced out. So that's that. And then information, personal information. So that's what we're going to get into. There's some interesting stuff about diet here that I will, of course, expand as much as I can find that is useful. So yeah, nothing else to say, but I'm thinking this will be a 2-part session, so let's try to get halfway through it, and then we'll finish it in the next episode. So let's begin. First question, as usual, Don says, would you first please give me the condition of the instrument? Ra says, the physical energy deficit of this entity is the most substantial across which we have come. Wow. The mental and mental-emotional distortions are near to balance, and the vital energy of the instrument as a whole is distorted towards health or strength-weakness due to the will of the instrument. So notice, this is small points for people who study the Law of One. Notice how Ra, when they say strength-weakness, then they're referring to, I guess, that, in this case, just strength. Right, but they always talk about their opposites, right, or their apparent opposites, and I guess the spectrum. So it's interesting whenever they use that. It's hard to see sometimes in things like probability, possibility vortices, and then possibility probabilities. But yeah, I won't get into all of that. There's so many love light and learn teaching and so on, these space-time and time-space, they're talking about the same thing, but just they're reverse size of it. And just interesting to see how they even said here mental, emotional. So that's a direction as well. Cool stuff to know about studying the Law of One and Ra's vocabulary. So yeah, what's interesting here is that Carla had a substantial amount of energy. And that's like the most they have seen. They say that they have seen, right? The physical energy deficit of this entity is the most substantial across which we have come. Actually, no, that is the physical, right? The mental, emotional distortions are near to balance, and the vital energy is going towards. So no, I got too excited with this. It's not that it's like she was tanked, right? The physical energy deficit is the most substantial across which we have come. So never mind everything I said. Yeah, well, not surprising. Carla's physical energy was tanked. I think at the beginning is when she had the most energy. I remember, I don't know how long that session must have been, but I know we got session 16 has like 60 questions, 50 something like that. It was long. It's a very, very long session. So yeah, that is the situation right now with Carla. Let's find out more. We're going to get into a long question. Don says, will Rob please tell us what caused the pain and cramping in the instrument's stomach and what would be done or could be done to heal it? And here we get into the long question of this episode. Ross says, in order to observe the cause of physical distortions toward illness, one must look to the energy center, which is blocked. In this situation, the blockage being yellow ray. The experience has had the characteristics of that region of the chemical body. The so-called lacuna in the wind-ridden armor of light and love was closed and not only repaired but much improved. So I'm not sure what they mean by that. The so-called lacuna in Spanish, laguna, we refer to like a lagoon or a pond, lake. That's a laguna. So it refers to the same thing here, but I think it means gap, or like a space. I remember that we use that word also in lagunas mentales, which means like mental spaces, gaps that happen in people. So that space or gap in the wind-ridden armor, I'm not sure what that means, of light and love was closed and not only repaired but much improved. So I guess that has to do with the healing, the metaphysical healing that happened in the yellow ray body. Right? In this situation, the blockage being yellow ray, the experience has had the characteristics of that region of the chemical body. So this is not often the case and I derive this information from other channelings in the same confederation, the same source, if you will, not the raw material, but other conscious channeling, where they say that not every illness or discomfort that we have in our body is related to the specific center in which is located. For example, if it's near the solar plexus, it could be something else. It could be something related to another energy center. This goes way beyond my capacity to understand the whole energetics of the body, but even Ross said that even acupuncture is inaccurate, as is any way of treating the body through physical means, and not taking into consideration the complexity of the energy systems, which is all over the place. So again, I'm not an expert on this and I won't comment any further, but that's what we have. Ra continues and says, however, the distortions energized during this momentary lapse from free energy flow are serious and shall be continuing for, in all probability, there it is, vortices of some of your spacetime. In all probability vortices, some of your spacetime, for a predisposition to spasticity in the transverse column has been energized. For a predisposition to spasticity in the transverse column has been energized. Okay. There is also pre-existing weakness in pancreatic function, especially that linked with the hypothalamus. There is also pre-existing damage to portions of the liver. Okay, so here we're going to get into some of her conditions, which is going to move into diet and assimilation of food. But what are they saying first? The distortions energized during this momentary lapse from free energy flow are serious and shall be continued. So she was affected, basically, and she would need time to recover, and of course treatment. So you see how they say it's quite possible, right, that for some space time, for some of our period in the waking state, basically, she will have this discomfort and illness, we can say, or dis-ease, because of the predisposition for spasticity. That's usually the spasms that you may feel, right? And especially, I think she said that in 1992 she finally had surgery in her colon. So this lasted a long time, and it continued to cause problems. Carla was very much affected in health all her life, so it's just amazing that she was able to do this channeling and survive for so long. So yeah, there is weakness in the pancreas, and that linked with the hypothalamus. I'm not sure how that's linked. That goes way beyond my knowledge. And there's also damage to the liver. Okay, so what else do they say? These lacks or distortions manifest in that portion of the system directly proceeding from the jejunum. That's a part of the intestine. Further, there is some irritation closer to the duodenum, another part of the intestine, which causes the instrument to fail in assimilating foodstuffs. This is an allopathically caused irritation. So here, I remember, by the way, I recommend that you go read the commentary from Jim and Carla, particularly Carla's, because that was, this is all about Carla here. And I remember she said that she had a long time use of cortisone, which is a steroid that is used for anti-inflammatory properties, right? And me being asthmatic in my youth, in essence, when I was a child and into the early teenagers, like 12, maybe 11, I suffered a lot of this, and cortisone was really the magic pill for me. And I can tell you that this, over time, it creates, I understand how she lost so much weight, because you lose appetite, it really destroys your muscles or your muscle tissue. It has a lot of effects. And I only took it whenever I had asthma for like a week or so. She was taking it for, I think she said 20 years. I'm going to corroborate that because it was a long time. And, that has an effect in the body. So here, they're talking about, let me see. There is cortisone, 30 years. Yes, for 30 years. Wow, that's a long time. And that's what started causing this. She said there were ulcers there, which had, they had been forming over time. This is very destructive steroid. So yeah, all of this just compounds. So that's part of the irritation. That irritation eventually forms into ulcers in the intestines. So yeah, well, obviously that's going to cause issues with assimilating food. Yeah. And that's why they say this is an allopathically caused irritation. Allopathy, I'm not sure. That refers to our medical system, or our way to treat modern medicine, basically, with, as Ross says, harsh chemicals that, hey, sometimes they're needed. Even A Course in Miracles says it. Sometimes you need them, and that's okay. Okay, so now we get into the diet. Ross says, the diet is of central import. We can go no further in observing the system of the entity as a full discussion of those distortions towards various weaknesses or weakness strengths which contribute to the present difficulty begin with lips and end with anus. we may note that the instrument has remained centered upon the creator at a percentage exceeding 90. This is the key. Continue in thanksgiving and gratitude for all things. That's a great advice at the bottom. But okay, so the central point is diet, as we all know. They cannot advise any further in discussing her weaknesses, basically, which contribute to the present difficulty. But they suggest, obviously, that it begins with the mouth and it ends with the anus, meaning how we consume food, how it's processed, and how we excrete it. So this whole system, it's funny to see that we humans are just a very complex evolution of the most primitive form of life, which is a tube. A tube absorbs from one end, it takes what it needs, and it releases what it doesn't. We can see this, in primitive forms of life. I mean, primitive. And that's what we are. If you look at ourselves, we're just that. It's one tube, starts with the mouth, ends at the anus, and the brain is basically something very much evolved to seek all these things that we need to put in our mouth and excrete at the end, at the bottom. So yeah, we're just this complex machine of looking food searching. So all right, the last advice is the best one. When they say to remain there, they were able to measure, I guess, Carla's dedication to the creator, which is 90%, I guess. Yes, or more, exceeding 90%. And this really boils down to how often are your thoughts directed towards the creator, towards this devotion, the path of this this devotion towards the self and everything, because the self is everything. The self is not something away from us. So yes, let's get to the next question. Next paragraph. We still have stuff. This is the last one though. Ross says, there are stronger anti-spasmodic drugs, which the one not known to this instrument, but known as Arthur, may aid by the offering. The recommendation to do this being, as it is, that which does not retain or remove life, and thus further remove from the instrument its opportunities for study in this situation, needs must be withheld. Not sure what they meant there. We are not in a position to recommend treatment at this space-time beyond the washing of the types of foodstuff ingested. So they recommend Arthur. We're going to find out about his last name. And I don't think I understand this part when they say the recommendation to do this needs must be withheld. Okay, the recommendation to seek for Arthur must be considered. And say, being as it is that which does not retain or remove life, and thus further remove from the instrument's opportunities for study in this situation. I don't know if that has to do with the treatment that she will get with Arthur. So I'm very confused about that. If anybody knows or figured this out, leave it in a comment, please. I would love to read it. But yeah, they're not in a position to recommend treatment, only to watch the diet. So we'll find out more about diet. Next question. Don says, I'm not quite sure I understood everything you said. Can you give me the last name of this Arthur and where he is located? Classic Ra, they say, we can. Don says, will you please do that? And Ra says, the entity, sound vibration Arthur, has a surname, Shon, and is of your locality. So there is something about this last name. I think if you listen to the tape, they said Shane or something like that, and this is the correct spelling, and I think it's German. Shame on me for not knowing how to pronounce it. I know it's Schon or Schon. I'm not quite sure. But yeah, Arthur Schon was the man that they were supposed to look for. So yeah, there's a funny mention in the commentary by Carla saying that they had to look up different spellings for Shane. I think is what Ra. I guess Ra's German is not as good either. So there you have it. To all my German friends. So question 5, Don says, what foods should the instrument eliminate from her diet in order to alleviate these painful attacks? So here we go into recommendations for diet or food. Ross says the information gained from the one known as Bob is that which is to be recommended. Further, all foodstuffs are to be cooked so that those things which are ingested be soft and easily macerated. There is a complex addiction due to the long-standing eating habits to your sugars. It is to be recommended that, therefore, this sugar be given in its more concentrated form in your time of late afternoon, as you term it, with the ingestion of the sugared libation approximately 1 to 2 of your hours after the evening meal. So I have some speculations here to add in terms of the recommendation to eat sugars, and that's all I can do. But in general, Ra is saying, first, because of the condition of her intestines, to cook very well the foods, and also to be macerated, soft and easily macerated, right? So cook them enough. That's because you want to be able to absorb all the nutrients easily, and not with rough foods, for example, raw vegetables or fruits themselves. They were excluded from the diet because of this. It'll cause a lot of intestinal discomfort and issues. So yeah, that's something that they had to do. And Carla talks about this in the commentary. So again, recommended to go read it. And then they talk about the addiction to sugar, right? You would think, to remove the sugars, because all they do is cause more problems. And they actually say, well, because of this addiction, try to take it in the late afternoon. Not in the morning, but late afternoon. Interesting, right? We would think that in the morning we would be more prone to consume this, but this is given her actual health system. So, and the ingestion of sugar libation, that's another word I had to look for, which is, I think, like the pouring of a liquid, and it's usually used for like sacramental things or spiritual rituals, something like that. So yeah, the sugar libation, whatever that is, a sugar drink or something, approximately 1 to 2 hours of after the evening meal. So even at night to consume the sugars. This goes against what we usually suggest. Well, first of all, no sugar. And also keep them away from the night. I think in the morning is when we're most capable. But it goes to show how everybody's different. And in this case, we're thinking about Carla's condition. Considering that she was like 80 pounds at this point and she needed the most amount of nutrients that she could absorb, then it makes sense that she was recommended to not only eat well-cooked foods so she can absorb the most. And remember, it's interesting because she had very little body mass, meaning muscle tissue and fat. So that which maintains, everything healthy. And also her intestines were damaged. So would this snowball into death, or can it be recovered? So I think these are why they're recommended for Carla. It's almost like to recover as best as possible her body, which she eventually did over time. But yeah, at this point she was very, very thin, and 80 pounds, that doesn't say much. I don't care how small she was or short. It's not a healthy weight for an adult woman. I guess that I can imagine. I'm sure there are some exceptions, but not for her. Definitely not for her. So what else do they say? It is further suggested that since this instrument has been using sugars for carbohydrates, that a small amount of carbohydrate, low in sugar, be ingested approximately 1 to 2 of your hours before the sleeping period. So, yeah, I guess her body was used to carbohydrates at this point, and they were trying to maximize the benefit of food and eating for absorption of nutrients, and so they kept recommending not only sugars but carbohydrates, low in sugar. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a little bit as we go through the next question, maybe. Why not? Let's talk about carbohydrates, which they still seem to be the devil in nowadays diets. Low carbohydrates. And there are reasons for that, so I'll just expand on that a little bit. But let's get into the next question. Don says in question 6, as I understand what you say, the instrument is to have no sugar until late in the afternoon. Is that correct? Ross says no. I actually thought that's... no, yeah, not exactly. Let's see. Don asks, I didn't fully understand what you meant about when she should have the sugar. Could you clear that up, please? Ross says, the concentrated sugar, that is the dessert, the ice cream, the cookie, should be ingested at that time. Small amounts of the fructose, maple, and raw honey may be ingested periodically for, as we have said, the chemistry of this yellow ray body is such that the sugar is being used by blood enzymes as would carbohydrates in a less distorted yellow ray physical vehicle. So here's my speculation on the whole thing, and maybe I'll go on a tangent here with carbohydrates. So, again, we see the situation with Carla being sort of ill with her intestines. She wasn't absorbing much nutrients from regular foods, right? If she would eat fruits or even vegetables or grains, the availability of the nutrients would be hindered by her conditions. Why is that? Because her intestines, let's say healthy intestines, they're able to work and break down and absorb many nutrients. Whereas in her condition, she wasn't able to do that. She needed to cook her foods, all of them, including fruits and vegetables as well, so they could be mushy and easily digestible. Remember that she was also in a very low weight of around 80 pounds, and that is hormones are working very differently there because you're sort of in a controlled starvation. So I wouldn't even say control, but just what's the word? It's been going unchecked. There's a starvation state that's been gone unchecked. And so that is creating an environment of hormones and enzymes that are not the same as with somebody who is stable in a specific weight and healthy, active, and so on. So again, I don't mean to give any sort of advice, just talk about this in general. Everybody is a different case, and of course we learn this when we begin to work with people in nutrition and training. Everybody's a specific case. But talking about the carbohydrates, I see that she, not only did she have an addiction for sugar, which is very common in this world nowadays, and it's been going for decades, of course. But the availability of sugars is everywhere, and everything has sugar. So understandable she would have this addiction, but also carbohydrates seem to be also the preference that she had for consuming food. So I guess that's why Ra is recommended that she would keep things that we consider unhealthy, like ice cream, cookies. I mean, these are the staple junk food, that we tend to avoid or limit as much as possible. But they're saying in the late afternoon, eat a dose. I like that in the morning they say small amounts of fructose. Fructose is the sugar present in, as the word suggests, fruits. And just because I like to get nerd on this, there is in general two types of carbohydrates. That's glucose and fructose. So fructose is present 100% in fruits, as far as I know. Maybe there's a little variation, and there is some glucose present in some fruits, but I doubt it. This is old knowledge, but I think it still stands. So those are fruits. Maple and honey actually are a combination of glucose and fructose. I forget, but it's usually more fructose than glucose. And the difference here, just because I'm getting all nerd on this, is that fructose can only be stored in the liver. You cannot transport glucose, rather fructose, to muscle tissue. Muscle tissue is the second organ in which, or tissue in general, where carbohydrates, or rather glycogen, is stored. So I understand the suggestion to first eat fructose, because when you wake up in the morning, your liver is depleted, and so that's why fruits in the morning are so classic, because you want to replenish liver glycogen, which is through fruits. I mean, if you eat anything else, you eat bread or something else, and it's carbohydrates, they're also going to be stored in the liver. But fructose can only be stored there in the liver, and the liver has a capacity of 50 grams of carbohydrates. Let's just call them carbohydrates at this point. And if you want to eat more, then that would either try to be processed in the liver, and if it's full, then guess what? It'll have to be transformed into fat, and that's where we get into liver fat. Or if it's glucose, it'll try to go into the muscle tissue. Now, again, do you use your muscle enough to also deplete the glycogen that is there? Glycogen is the stored form of carbohydrate in the muscles. That's a question. So how much of that do you eat? And how much of that you use? And that's why we recommend exercise, particularly I'm going to call it weightlifting. It doesn't have to be weights, but just create tension in the muscles. That's how you use glycogen, or muscle glycogen. You always want to keep, this a healthy system in which you're consuming a certain amount and you're using a certain amount. This gets all technical and boring, but the point is that that's the system in which you're ingesting and you're using, and you want to keep that balance. So the recommendation, fructose and maple or honey. I like those recommendations for the morning. Breaking your fast in the morning with, I would recommend honey. Honey has many more properties. Maple, it's a little bit more devoid from other substances that are present in honey. And they recommend, again, this, I have so many things that I would like to talk to Ra about. People usually ask me, what would you ask Ra, if you had a question? I would say, why did you recommend ice cream and cookies? What's wrong with you? No, but here I kind of understand, Carla needed anything. And that's why they say, here's the answer. See, I don't have to ask Ra anything. They say that because the chemistry of her body was so used to sugar, and they're being used by the blood enzymes, which is kind of a question for me, because we don't have particular blood enzymes that use carbohydrates or are involved in the metabolism of carbohydrates. We can talk about pancreatic enzymes and liver enzymes, maybe because they can be measured in blood, in the bloodstream, but they're not particular from the blood. They're from pancreas and liver, some in the intestines. So I don't know. I don't know what they mean, but maybe that's what they meant. Those enzymes that help metabolize carbohydrate. The whole point is that she was able to process these carbohydrates by easily, because she was used to. And now it speaks to something else, which is how we get used to processing certain foods. The body becomes efficient at breaking down these types of food. And so you will find that you are more inclined to eat the same things all the time. Now, because I want to make this a little bit informative in terms of how your body works, and if you have some doubts about what you should be eating, then this can actually help. What you shouldn't be eating, right? But your body asks for it. So you're used to certain foods, junk food especially, and your body has become accustomed to metabolizing these foods, and so it'll ask for it. If you gradually change it, I know it's going to be a little bit difficult at the beginning because your body is still demanding this food. Just keep up with it, and you will see the body will have to adapt, because guess what? It's not available, so why would it keep asking for it? But you have to stay consistent. Something happens, especially with sugar consumption, and I attest to this with many people that I have had around me and do this, is that your tolerance for sugar is reduced tremendously. You have no idea how much your tolerance for sugar has been increased, meaning that you can eat a lot of sugar. I was a sugar addict for years, especially when I was bodybuilding. I would eat vast amounts of sugar. And when I went through this process of just keeping my diet as clean as possible in terms of, and clean doesn't mean that you won't eat certain things. It's just that you're based always on whole foods. That's it. That's the trick. When I tried again to eat some sugars that I had long abolished from my diet, it was so cloying, it was so overwhelming that I could feel the difference of staying away from sugars. So again, that's not the case here, because Carla needed anything that she could absorb, and I kind of understand it. So there's a lot to be said here, or at least I have a lot to say. But if I can leave just a sort of summary for anybody, is that carbohydrates they're an essential part of our diet, meaning that it's very hard to eliminate them. Yes, there is the ketogenic diet, which I did for years, and it's actually a good idea if I could recommend people lowering their carbohydrates, because the reason why we have demonized them is because they are pretty addictive. They're easy to absorb and they're abundant. So why not try it and reduce them? And again, I'm not suggesting a ketogenic diet, but that's even a possibility to play with. But if I can add a trick to this way to lower tolerance on carbohydrates and begin to enjoy more whole foods, fasting, intermittent fasting, it's a big one. And it doesn't take long. I mean, it doesn't take much before you adapt to it. Just skip breakfast for an hour and so on, until you get to a good 16 hours of no eating. it is easier than you can imagine. And what would happen is that your tolerance for food will lower, and you'll be able to eat less food, be more sensitive to carbohydrates or sugars in general, and you may want to eat, more whole foods. Again, this doesn't work for everybody, and there's some coaching needed, which I would love to offer it to you, but I no longer do that. So, sorry, can't help you there. But the internet is full of people that can. However, that's my suggestion. Carbohydrates are not the devil. It's just that we have been accustomed to eating so much of it, particularly in the form of sugars. And last thing I'll say, because I mentioned ketogenic diet, when you begin to eat a ketogenic diet, for those who don't know it, is where you eat the vast majority of your calories come from fats and proteins. So the limit is 50 grams of carbohydrates. You would see how little that is in a regular diet. I think the regular American eats about 300 to 400 grams of carbohydrates a day, something like that, which is a lot. Remember that I said that the liver can only store 50, and your muscles, depending on your muscle mass, can get to 700 to 1200, but that's stored in there, and if you don't use it, it's still stored. So this is what generates problems in the pancreas with insulin resistance. This is what creates all sorts of fat, adipose tissue, liver tissue, or liver fat, all kinds of issues in the body. It's just an overconsumption of carbohydrates. Fun note, just because I'm so excited to talk about this, carbohydrates do not turn into fat. That's a big mistake that a lot of people think. Carbohydrates do not get stored as fat. There is a pathway in the body for that, and it's almost never used. Only in obese people, morbidly obese, that's when it's usually, active. But to get to that point, it's very difficult. So I won't get into the details, just wanted to throw that in. I know I threw a lot of information and misconceptions about this, but hey, I got started with this. This episode doesn't have much material, and why not? I can talk more about this. Maybe in the conclusions, I'll add more stuff. But that's all I got for now. Let's move on. Question 8, Don says, I'm sorry that I'm so slow at picking up precisely what we're getting at here, but I want to be sure we get this right, so I'll probably ask a few more stupid questions. Don, was that spasm that caused the extreme pain a spasm of the ilium? And Ross says, partially. The transverse colon also spasmed, as did the ducts to the liver in its lower portion. There were also muscle spasms from the bronchial coverings down through the pelvis and from shoulder blades to hips. These sympathetic spasms are a symptom of the exhaustion of the entity's physical vehicle. So I don't have much to cover here. That's just what was happening in Carla. Most of it just because of the all the damage that her organs had, and these spasms were just a result of this very frail condition. So yeah, I don't have much to add there. Question 9, Don says, then these spasms, of course, were originally, he pauses and says, the opening was made by yellow ray blockage, but these spasms then are triggered, I am assuming, by the foodstuff, which has to do with the ingestion of sugar, as I understand it. Am I correct? Ross says, you are partially correct. And then Don says, then what else causes the pain, the spasm? I can't read today. So what else is causing the spasm if it's not just the sugar, something else? Interesting answer. Ross says, we speak of two types of cause. The first, or proximate cause, was a meal with too much oil and too large a burden of undercooked vegetable material. The sugar of the dessert and the few sips of your coffee mixture also were not helpful. The second cause, and this shall be stated clearly, is the energizing of any pre-existing condition in order to keep this group from functioning by means of removing the instrument from the ranks of those able to work with those of Ra. So the second cause is what we know as the psychic attack. Not much to say there, but just that this condition was present since, I think, session 50, or who knows from where, but that's when it started to intensify, this psychic greeting, as they decided to call it. And that's that. That's just a result also of the energizing, right? It's almost like the condition is there, and then this energizes it. The other were, you can see the problem here, undercooked vegetables, really bad because her intestines were not capable of dealing with this. Too much oil. So oil adds another layer here. Let me add this in. I promise I won't go on a tangent. When you eat a lot of oil delays digestion. Now, normally, this is something that you should consider depending on your macronutrient intake and the variety of foods that you're eating. But that's what fats in general do. Not just oil, of course, but all fats. They add a delay to the digestion of foods. And this is why, speaking of the ketogenic diet, people are so satiated because they eat proteins with fats. And these are very satiating. But no carbohydrates. Sorry, there is no perfect diet. There's always something that you need to sacrifice. So yeah, that's what oils do. And that's probably not a good idea for Carla. She wanted something that was easily digestible and not delay it like undercooked vegetables, which again, you need to process them much more if they were fully cooked, and oils or fats that cause that. Then dessert, you add the sugar in, that causes some, there's an acidity also because of the sugar included. Now, think of all of this in just one meal, right? You're adding all these things to Carla's stomach, and that's a problem. So the dessert, of course, has a little bit more oil or fats and the sugar, causing that irritation as well. And coffee, well, speaking of irritation, coffee does that too. It's a little abrasive in the tissue. So not a good mixture. She needed a little bit more advice in terms of how to eat. And I don't blame her. We are still pretty much ignorant. A lot of people think that we have advanced a lot in nutrition. Guess what? Nobody cares about nutrition research. I'm telling you, I've been in, I'm not going to say the deepest, but I've been very involved for a couple of decades already in nutrition. And it is baffling how little we know about nutrition. And a lot of it is, of course, lobbied and, in favors of certain foods and so on, diets and so on. It's crazy, but food is marketing, or food is a marketing business. Anyhow, let's not go down that rabbit hole. Next question. Question 11, Don says, now, is there, and he pauses, then he says, the two areas then that the instrument can look to for curing this problem. He pauses again and says, I understand that the yellow ray blockage problem has completely repaired, shall I say. If this is not correct, could you make suggestions on that, please? Ra says, each entity must, in order to completely unblock yellow ray, love all which are in relationship to it, with hope only to the other selves joy, peace, and comfort. I think I will end it here, and we will continue in the next episode. Let me just see, how far are we? Yeah, let's leave it here. We don't have much more for the next episode, and I definitely can finish this today. Actually, let's read. No, that'll be it. That'll be it for today. So, really good question, or actually answer here, where Dawn is asking about the yellow ray blockage that she had and that had been repaired. That's what Ross suggested in one of the questions, that lacuna that I talked about. And they're saying that to completely unblock yellow ray. So this should actually be labeled, and it isn't. Oh no, it is. It is. Of course they are. They're so thorough. I love them. Yeah, this is a short paragraph that talks about how to unblock yellow ray energy centers. So right here, right at the bottom of the heart, right at the beginning of spiritual work, is the unblocking of this restriction that we sometimes buy to other people. How's it done? They say, love all which are in relationship to you, with hope. The hope is only that the other self sees joy, peace, and comfort. So anybody around you, right? Anybody who is in relationship with you, that could be the mailman, it could be your mother, it could be your colleagues at work or college. It doesn't matter. Anybody who is in relationship with you, who is in contact with you, that you only hope that they have joy, peace, and comfort. It's the best we can do. And that is not something that you do per se. At least in the direct path, we understand that this is not something that I am doing. Yes, I know there are many suggestions and techniques that allow the mind to mimic this, and is to create like positive thoughts, or to have affirmations, or to substitute a negative tendency with a positive one, that kind of stuff. It's helpful, but it's not the real deal. The real deal is for you to realize that that's what you are. Therefore, there is no effort in being. And being is free. So, it's a kind of understanding that you have to allow to filter in your mind, and it'll start informing your thoughts. So that's how we do it, or that's how it's done. Conclusions, only because I want to finish this and I want to piggyback. I know I said I was going to talk more about nutrition, but I think I did enough. This podcast is not about nutrition. Maybe I'll open one. Maybe I'll create one in the future. Very unlikely, but yeah, let's talk about this. This is much more important. Like I said, in the direct path, we recognize who we truly are, right? We're not interested first. In the first step, we're not interested in the world. We're not interested in our minds. We're not interested in anything that informs us from our past experiences. We don't care. I know it sounds rough. It sounds like, oh my God, I'm going to abandon all my understandings and beliefs. Yes, abandon everything. Don't worry, it'll come back. It's like trying to push water in a river or a lake down. You try to push it down, it'll come back. It'll just fill itself right up. So don't worry, just leave it on the side for a moment. We'll do this investigation. We'll find out who I truly am. Because if what I am is an effortless being of love and peace and joy, then I don't have to do anything. And in fact, once we take this step into finding out who we are and we return to experience, then everything else that you left behind for a moment will come back, and now you can face it with this new knowledge, with this new understanding. And so as they come back, you can begin to discern. This is usually the work. I'm going to call it the work. It's not really something that you're doing, but you're discerning. What are those things that you thought were, this way? And now how is it informed by this understanding? I can't even say this is good or bad. It used to be, a bad thing that I do. Now I do it right. It's just allow this understanding to inform your condition patterns, your thoughts. You'll find out that some of them were just waiting to be illuminated by this knowledge so they can evolve. Some of them will just transform. Some of them will just stop being important and things like that. You will see the changes. And in here, we're talking specifically about how this understanding allows us to, like Ross says, act in the hopes that the other self can derive joy, peace, and comfort from your relationship to them, right? If your relationship to everybody is to bring a smile, to calm them down, or to bring comfort to them, then that is obviously a true relationship with somebody else based on who you are, because you are those things. It's interesting because whenever I do this investigation with somebody, we go down to it, and who are you? What is the essence of yourself? And we get down to it. The first thing that anybody says is, well, I feel peace. Peace is only because there is an agitation going on in the mind. And suddenly when all of this subsides, you find that what I truly am seems to be peace. See, but this peace is not an absence of things. It's an abundance of life. Life is peaceful. When it moves, then it's just wow, is joy, is happiness, the way we understand it as, the joy of life. And so our relationship with others begins to be love, because we understand that who I truly am is exactly you. Not in our egoic projection. That's just an image. The image doesn't stand too long in the presence of awareness. Indeed, it doesn't stand at all. I mean, try to keep an image of yourself. It'll go away. It'll be substituted by something else, by another thought. It's always changing. So, awareness is colored by experience in the same way that a film colors the light that is being projected through. And that's just how it is. If you investigate that, then you'll be able to see that that's your true nature. That's what you are. And it becomes effortless. So I just wanted to mention that how the direct path deals with this. Like I said, knowing yourself is related to everything that is suggested in the spiritual path. All you need to do is get right down to it, and you will see. If you're interested in this, of course, hit me up in Instagram. That's where I usually talk to people, because guess what? YouTube doesn't have a direct message system. So Instagram is the place to make contact with me for the first time. We can talk about this. That's my mentoring, the program that I have for the direct path and the way I teach it. And we can talk about anything about it if you're interested. See if this is something that we are a match to do together, and we'll get to it. If you just want to learn the steps and the method, very, very affordable course in my website. Description has all the links. Go check it out. And if you just want to hang out with us, which is a small group that we have, go to the link that is also in the description for Telegram. That's where we hang out every week whenever possible. and we either do a seminar on the law of one, or we discuss the direct path itself. We do a meditation. It's a beautiful thing that I love doing. So that's how you can get in touch. That's all I got today. We got exactly to the hour. Love it. We have another episode for session 102, and then we'll finish. Have a good day or good night, whatever you are. Stay at peace. Keep being present. And I'll see you in part 2 of session 102.